For decades, the world worshipped Paul Newman as Hollywood's untouchable icon, the blue-eyed king of loyalty, love, and perfection. But when his daughter Nell finally opened her mouth after a lifetime of silence, the legend cracked. What she revealed wasn't a family, but a stage set. Not a marriage, but a lie. And buried beneath his fame was a secret so powerful, so forbidden, it threatened to rewrite everything we thought we knew about him. The interview that broke the legend, when Nell Newman finally spoke. For 66 years, Nell Newman lived inside a silence so thick it felt like a second skin. She grew up watching the world worship her father, Paul Newman, Hollywood's untouchable blue-eyed god, while she carried a truth she was never allowed to name. And then, one quiet Sunday morning, she did the unthinkable. She sat down with CBS and opened the door everyone believed would stay locked forever. The moment her first words hit the air, something cracked. It wasn't just the polished image Hollywood had spent decades polishing. It was the myth itself, the myth of a perfect marriage, a perfect household, a man who wore loyalty like armor. Nell's voice was steady, but what she revealed struck like a blade. The father adored on movie posters was not the man who walked through their home's hallways. Behind those legendary ocean blue eyes, she said, was a stranger living two lives, one for the cameras and one for someone the world never saw. The studio fell silent as she spoke, not because her story was dramatic, but because it was forbidden. She described a childhood where affection was a performance, where smiles were rehearsed, where questions were punished with cold distance. She described a mother who folded into silence and a father who vanished for days without a trace, only to return with laughter meant for someone else, someone whose voice didn't belong to her mother. But then came the words that detonated everything. Nell revealed that her father's final will, the document that should have honored the family he built, instead erased them entirely, leaving his fortune to a mysterious man identified only by two letters, R.R. The host tried to hide the shock. The cameras leaned in. Viewers at home could feel their breath catch, because in that moment, Paul Newman, the man America believed it knew better than any star before him, became something else. Not a legend, not a hero, but a mystery wrapped in a secret one that his own daughter had finally dared to drag into the light. A childhood built on silence, the family that looked perfect only in pictures. Nell Newman's childhood was wrapped in a quiet so thick it felt rehearsed. The world saw glossy photos of a radiant Hollywood family, but Nell learned early that those images were nothing but props. Inside the mansion, affection was a performance no one believed in. Paul Newman, the man adored for his warmth, moved through his own home like a distant star, shining for everyone except the people who needed him most. Joanne Woodward, the graceful darling of American cinema, transformed into a shadow whenever he stepped into a room. Her silence wasn't anger, it was surrender. The kind that forms when love turns into something too heavy to carry aloud. Paul vanished at dawn, returned without explanation, and offered only a thin, practiced smile. At night, Nell heard him laughing softly during long-distance calls, a warmth she had never once seen directed at her mother. Joanne washed dishes with trembling hands, her eyes hollowing with each passing year. Then one winter evening, the illusion cracked. A glass shattered. Nell found her mother on the bedroom floor, clutching a shard, whispering, "You lied again, you lied again." When Nell asked what happened, Joanne finally let a sliver of truth escape. "Not every man loves women, darling, but Hollywood will never accept that." Soon after, Nell discovered a Polaroid from her father's wallet. Paul smiling at another man with a tenderness that needed no explanation. Joanne tore it to pieces and fed it to the flames, repeating, "We will never speak of this." And from that moment, silence became the house's only rule. To the world, The Newmans were perfect. But Nell knew perfection was the costume, and silence was the cage. And you, if you were her, watching a family crumble behind photographs everyone worshipped, would you have dared to break the silence or protected the lie? Scott Newman, the son who dared to ask the forbidden question. Long before the world sensed cracks in the Newman legend, Scott, Paul's eldest son, felt them splitting beneath his feet. He carried his father's jawline, his charm, and the unbearable weight of a truth no one dared to name. Hollywood called him Paul's rebellious double, but inside the Newman home, Scott wasn't rebelling. He was drowning in what he saw. He watched Joanne cry behind closed doors, watched Paul return from unexplained trips with the calm of a man living two separate lives, watched the silence between his parents thicken until it felt like the house itself couldn't breathe. By high school, he could no longer pretend. Why did his mother flinch at Paul's touch? Why did his father turn cold whenever Scott said, "I love you"? And why were certain male visitors welcomed with a warmth his mother never received? The breaking point came at a party in 1974. A drunken boy sneered, "Maybe you should ask your dad whether he prefers men or women." The words detonated. Scott snapped, beating the boy until he needed stitches. He was expelled. And Paul never came. Not to comfort him, not to defend him. He sent a lawyer and a check. That night, Scott hurled his childhood trophies into the fireplace and shouted into the smoke, "Who are you? Who are you really?" It was the first time the forbidden question had been spoken out loud. The answer was the same as always: silence. When whispers about Paul's double life hit the tabloids, a shadowy photo of a man resembling him holding hands with another man, Scott's free fall only accelerated. Roles disappeared. Producers whispered. He wasn't just battling addiction. He was battling a secret he was never allowed to name. On November 20th, 1978, Scott was found alone in his apartment. A bottle, scattered pills, and a television still playing his father accepting an award. The world called it an overdose. Nell called it the cost of silence. The letter to Red, the night Nell discovered the truth her family feared. Years after Scott's death, Nell believed she had already seen the darkest corners of her family, but the truth had been waiting in the shadows. One freezing night in 1981, she walked the silent halls of the Newman estate and paused before her father's study. A warm light seeped through the cracked door, followed by a sound she almost never heard from Paul Newman, a tired, broken sigh. Curiosity tightened around her like a fist. She leaned in and saw him hunched over his desk, writing with a tension that made his hand tremble. It wasn't a script. It wasn't a note to Joanne. It was a letter, raw, intimate, alive, addressed to one name, Red. Her breath stopped. No one in the family used that name for Robert Redford. Only Paul did. She lifted the first page for a heartbeat, and that was enough, dear Red, the one who reminds me I am still human, not a symbol. The words blurred as tears gathered. He wrote of desert nights filming Butch Cassidy, of hands brushing in shadows, of fear, not of gossip, but of wanting what he was never allowed to want. Then came the line that shattered her illusions. If you walked into this room and looked at me the way you once did, I would give up everything. The fame, the family, all of Hollywood. A phone rang in the next room. Paul stood. Nell slipped away like someone fleeing a crime scene, her heart pounding with the weight of a truth her family had spent decades burying. Weeks later, the secret surfaced violently. Joanne received a single anonymous call. "If you still care about your marriage, go to the Mayflower Hotel, room 708. That night, Paul claimed he was meeting a producer, but everyone knew which man Hollywood whispered was his soulmate. When Joanne returned, her face was pale, a bruise darkening her arm, her eyes emptied of the fire she once carried. From that night on, their marriage didn't break. It simply began collapsing in slow, inevitable silence. Gore Vidal, the shadow who walked beside Paul when no one was supposed to look. After the Mayflower incident, Nell thought she had seen every fracture in her parents' marriage. But the truth had more than one face, and one of them belonged to Gore Vidal. He had lingered around their family for years, the brilliant writer, the sharp-tongued political icon, the friend who always seemed to know a little too much. But one night, he stepped out of the background and into the center of a secret Nell never wanted to witness. She went to the Carlisle Hotel to deliver documents to Joanne. The elevator doors slid open, and time froze. Paul walked out of the hallway, coat draped over his arm, but it was the man beside him that stole Nell's breath. Gore moved with him not like a friend, but like someone who understood Paul's private world in a way others weren't allowed to. Their hands brushed. Paul gave him a soft, intimate smile, the same look Nell had once seen in the Polaroid. Paul saw her. He stiffened, not with guilt, but with a silent, desperate plea. "Don't say it." Gore greeted her coolly, and the elevator swallowed them both, sealing a truth her family had kept buried under decades of charm and prestige. But Gore didn't disappear afterward. He appeared more. Late-night calls, unexplained trips, notes marked only with the letter G. Years later, Nell found a worn photograph of Paul and Gore sitting by a lakeside, leaning into each other with the kind of quiet ease that needs no explanation. Joanne never confronted Gore. She didn't have to. Her silence was its own verdict. Then, in 1995, Gore published a memoir containing one haunting line: "There are men who will never belong to us, but when they smile, we feel alive." He never named Paul, but everyone knew. Gore never wrote like that about anyone else. And when an interviewer finally dared to ask if Paul had been the great love of his life, Gore only smiled and whispered, "We shared nights neither of us wished to leave." The studio went silent. Joanne Woodward, the wife who remembered the pain even when she forgot everything else. As the years drifted on, Hollywood continued to worship the Newman-Woodward marriage as its shining symbol of loyalty. But inside their quiet Connecticut home, the truth was eroding piece by piece, until even memory began to betray Joanne. When the first signs of Alzheimer's appeared, it stole names, birthdays, entire chapters of her life. But strangely, heartbreak was the one thing the disease could not erase. Some days, she stared at photographs of herself accepting the Oscar for The Three Faces of Eve and whispered, "Who is this woman?" She forgot storylines, co-stars, the applause that once shook theaters. But when Nell placed a picture of Paul in her lap, Joanne's eyes sharpened, as if pain had burned through the fog of her fading mind. There were moments when she drifted between dream and memory, her voice fragile yet piercingly clear. Nurses whispered about nights she woke suddenly, speaking of perfume on Paul's clothes, calls from the Essex House Hotel, or a golden hair on a pillow that wasn't hers. She repeated a name with trembling breath, Robert, a name Nell had heard only once before, decades earlier, in a hotel elevator where a teenage girl saw the truth her mother never dared to confront. Then came the day Joanne finally said the words that shattered Nell's last illusions. Nell sat beside her, holding her fragile hands when Joanne murmured, "That was the day he betrayed me, Essex House." Room 12, 17. I called all night. No one answered. The room fell silent. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. She couldn't recall her own birthday, yet she remembered the exact room number of the night her marriage broke. Joanne never screamed, never confronted him publicly, never let the world see her break. But every time her eyes drifted toward a window, toward the fading evening light, there was a quiet accusation buried deep within them, one that no disease could erase. Her love had survived decades, but so had her wounds. The will that shattered everything, when Paul Newman chose a stranger over his own blood. When Paul Newman died in 2008, America mourned a hero. Tributes filled every screen, praising the loyal husband and devoted father. But just 3 days later, the illusion broke. Nell received a brief clinical call from her father's private legal team. The will has been executed. No condolences, no explanation, only the beginning of a truth sharp enough to cut. Inside the documents, Nell found the unimaginable. Paul Newman, the man who built a legacy on family values, had removed his wife and all 6 of his children from his final will. Not reduced, not shared, completely erased. His entire fortune, including the massive Newman's own empire, was handed to the foundation, controlled solely by one man, Robert Forrester, the advisor Paul trusted more than anyone else. Worse still, a clause warned that anyone who contested the will would lose even the symbolic small sum left to them. It was a legal fortress, built to shut his family out forever. Nell felt as if she were reading a stranger's words. Joanne, fading in the fog of dementia, was left with nothing. The children, who had spent years helping shape the brand's image, were cut out without a single explanation. And whispered rumors began to surface. Was Paul even mentally capable when he signed the document? Leaked medical notes hinted at memory loss, confusion, and impaired judgment in the months before his death, signs that should have voided any legal decision. Yet none of these records appeared in the official file. Someone had buried them. Then came the discovery that changed everything again. A handwritten letter hidden inside one of Joanne's old books. It was unmistakably Paul's handwriting. "Everything belongs to you, Joanne. If things go wrong, believe it was never my choice." It held no legal power, but it held the truth his will tried to bury. The hidden letter and the battle for truth. When Paul Newman's legacy turned into a war zone, after the will detonated like a bomb inside the Newman family, the fight for answers began. Nell wasn't searching for money. She was searching for her father's real voice, the one buried beneath lawyers, clauses, and signatures that felt nothing like the man she once hoped he was. The more she looked, the more the truth twisted into something darker. Independent lawyers quietly admitted what no one dared say publicly. Paul may not have been mentally sound when he signed his final will. Former colleagues whispered that he seemed confused, forgetful, sometimes unsure of where he was. Yet somehow, a perfectly structured, meticulously worded legal document emerged just weeks before his death. It didn't feel like Paul. It felt engineered. Then came the discovery that cut deeper than any legal betrayal. A handwritten letter hidden inside Joanne's old copy of the Prophet. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably his. The message was devastating in its simplicity. "Everything belongs to you, Joanne. If anything goes astray, know it was never my choice. I love you until the end." This wasn't a man abandoning his family. This was a man afraid of losing control or of someone taking it from him. Meanwhile, Robert Forrester tightened his grip on the empire. He increased his own salary, removed projects the family supported, and shut every Newman child out of the foundation's board. The world still saw the smiling legend, but behind the scenes, his legacy was being rewritten by hands that were not his. By 2020, Nell's final attempt to reopen the case was denied. The court claimed there wasn't sufficient evidence, even as the suspicious pieces continued piling up like unanswered questions no one wanted to touch. If you uncovered a letter proving your father's heart, yet a legal system protecting his silence, would you keep fighting or accept that some truths die with the man who held them? The empty legacy. The truth a legend never found the courage to speak. In the quiet years that followed the legal battles, Nell finally understood a truth she once feared to admit. Her father's legacy would never belong to his family. The world kept its hero, the blue-eyed icon, the philanthropist, the man who seemed incapable of darkness. But what he left behind for them wasn't glory. It was silence. She often sat on the old porch in Westport, watching the wind move through the trees Paul once tended, listening for a voice that never returned. She realized then that the deepest wound wasn't the lost inheritance, the rewritten will, or the secrets whispered behind hotel doors. It was the absence of a simple human confession, the kind of truth only a father can give his child. Paul Newman died a legend to millions, yet remained a mystery to the people who shared his home. He gave kindness to strangers, but left his own family searching for pieces of him buried in letters, rumors, and memories too painful to hold. And so Nell learned her final lesson. Fame builds monuments, but silence builds scars. A legacy is not what the world applauds. It's the truth we leave to the ones who love us.